What you're about to watch stopped an entire television studio, and no one on that stage could explain why they were crying. Raymond Coates had not slept more than 3 hours in a single night for the past 4 years, 2 months, and 11 days. He knew the exact number because he had counted. He kept a small notebook in the front pocket of his work shirt, a green canvas shirt with his name stitched in yellow thread above the chest pocket. And every morning before he left the house at 4:47 a.m., he would open to that day's page and write one word. Still. That was it. Just still. Still here. Still breathing. Still trying. His daughter Camille had given him that notebook for his birthday 3 years before. She was 11 then. She had bought it herself at the dollar store with money she saved from not buying lunch at school for 2 weeks. She had wrapped it in the comics section of the Sunday newspaper because she didn't have wrapping paper, and she had drawn a small sun in the corner of the front cover with a red crayon. He had never told her what he used it for. He told her he wrote his work schedules in it. That was the lie he told the person who loved him most. Nobody knew the truth. Not his mother, who was 73 years old and living in the same house in Decatur, Georgia, where Raymond had grown up. The house with the green shutters and the broken gutter that had been broken since 1987 and would probably stay broken until the house fell down. Not his older brother Dennis, who called every Sunday and talked for 45 minutes about football without ever once asking how Raymond was doing. Really doing. Not the men he worked with at the warehouse in Norcross, where Raymond had loaded and unloaded trucks for 11 years, earning $19.40 an hour, arriving early and leaving late because staying busy was the only thing that kept the thoughts from getting loud. The crisis had started on a Thursday. Not a dramatic Thursday. No storm, no accident, no phone call in the middle of the night. Just a Thursday in February, 4 years and some months ago, when Raymond's wife Tanya had sat down across from him at the kitchen table after Camille went to bed, folded her hands in front of her, and told him she was leaving. She had been preparing the sentence for 3 months, she said. She had practiced it. She wanted him to know she wasn't angry. She had just stopped feeling anything, and she thought it was kinder to go while she still respected him than to stay until she didn't. He had sat at that table for 2 hours after she went upstairs to pack. He didn't cry. He didn't move. He just sat there with his hands flat on the table, feeling the grain of the wood under his palms, listening to Camille breathe through the baby monitor they still kept in the kitchen out of habit, even though Camille was 8 years old by then and didn't need it anymore. That sound, the slow, steady breathing of his daughter sleeping 12 feet above his head, was the only thing that kept him in his chair instead of walking out the front door and disappearing into the dark. He got custody. Tanya moved to Charlotte for a job she'd been offered months before she told him, and she sent money when she could and called Camille on Sundays, and Raymond never once said a word against her to his daughter. That cost him something. He wasn't sure what exactly, but he could feel the shape of the missing thing in his chest, like a tooth socket after an extraction, present as an absence, tender when touched. For the first 6 months, Raymond's mother came over 4 nights a week to help with Camille after school. Then she fell and broke her hip, and suddenly Raymond was managing his own grief, and his daughter's confusion, and his mother's recovery appointments all at once, on $19.40 an hour, in a 2-bedroom apartment in Stone Mountain, with a leaking kitchen faucet and a car with 214,000 miles on it that he prayed over every single morning. Literally prayed, hand on the hood, eyes closed, 30 seconds, because he could not afford for it to break down. Camille was the one who first noticed something was wrong. She was 9 by then. She came into the kitchen one morning and found Raymond standing at the counter with a cup of coffee. Just standing there, not drinking it, not moving, just standing. She walked up beside him and put her hand on his arm. She didn't say anything. She just stood there next to him with her small hand on his arm until the coffee went cold. She never mentioned it afterward, but Raymond saw the way she started watching him. Quick glances across the dinner table, checking. A 9-year-old child had become the person monitoring his emotional state, and the knowledge of that sat on him like a stone he could not put down. He had called a mental health line once at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday. He had been on hold for 31 minutes and then hung up. He had looked into therapy and found that his insurance covered 6 sessions per year with a $40 copay, and he had done the math and decided he couldn't manage the $240, and so he had put the notebook in his pocket and kept writing still every morning and kept going. The system had failed him quietly, the way systems fail quiet people. Not with a dramatic crash, but with a series of small doors that turned out to be walls. A coworker named Marcus had entered the family into the Family Feud audition process as a birthday gift to Raymond's daughter, who had turned 12 and whose one dream was to see the show in person. Raymond hadn't known until 3 months later when the callback came. He almost didn't go. He had taken the letter out of the mailbox, stood in the parking lot of his apartment complex, and almost put it directly in the recycling bin. Camille had seen it from the window and come flying down the stairs in her socks. That was the only reason they were standing on that stage. They were playing against the Williamson family. 5 members, matching blue shirts, the grandmother in the center seat with a hand-painted sign that said, "God is good," in glitter letters. The Coates family had won the first 2 rounds. Raymond had answered correctly 4 times, each time with a small nod. No celebration. The practiced restraint of a man who had learned not to expect good things to last. Steve Harvey had been watching him. Steve always watches. He watched Raymond the way a man watches someone he recognizes without being able to name why. During the bonus round setup, Steve walked over for what was supposed to be a light moment, one of the brief between-round conversations the show uses to pace itself. He leaned on the podium and asked Raymond the standard question. What did Raymond want to do with the money if they won? Raymond looked down at his hands for a moment. The studio was quiet, in the way studios get quiet when cameras are still rolling, but the audience has stopped expecting anything to happen. And then Raymond said it. 1 sentence, 11 words. I just want my daughter to stop worrying about me. The studio fell completely silent, not the polite quiet of an audience waiting for the next thing. Silence. The kind that fills a room from the floor up, the kind where you become aware of your own heartbeat. Steve Harvey did not move for 3 full seconds. The cameras kept rolling. The producer in the booth did not cut. The audience of 300 people did not make a sound. Steve took 1 step back from the podium. Just 1. Like the sentence had physically reached him. Camille, standing 3 feet from her father, looked up at him with her eyes wide and bright, and her bottom lip moved, and she pressed her hand flat against her own chest, the way you do when something hits you somewhere deep and unexpected. The studio fell completely silent again when Steve finally spoke. Because what he said was not a joke, and it was not a pivot, and it was not anything that had ever been scripted. He said, "Wait." Just that. Wait. He turned to face his production team at the side of the stage. He held up 1 hand. He turned back to Raymond. He looked at Raymond the way you look at someone when you want to make sure they know you are actually seeing them, not the camera, not the moment, not the television. Them. "Brother," Steve said, I need you to hear me right now." But Steve wasn't done. He asked Raymond how long he had been carrying it. Raymond told him. 4 years, 2 months. Steve asked about the notebook. Raymond hadn't mentioned the notebook. He looked at Steve, confused. Steve said, "I can see it in your shirt pocket. You've touched it 3 times since you walked out here. What's in it?" Raymond reached into his pocket. He took out the notebook. He opened it to that day's page, and he showed it to Steve. And Steve looked at the single word written there. And then Steve Harvey, a man who has hosted television for 30 years, a man who has heard 10,000 stories on that stage, pressed his lips together and looked at the ceiling for a moment. And one camera operator in the back of the studio set his camera down on its mount and put both hands over his mouth. The studio fell completely silent, doesn't capture what happened next. The room held its breath. Steve turned to the camera, not to the audience, to the camera. He said, "I want to talk to everyone watching at home." He said it plainly, without theater. If you are carrying something alone right now, if you are writing one word in a notebook every morning just to remind yourself you're still here, I need you to know someone sees you. You are not invisible. You just haven't been in the right room yet. He paused. You are in the right room now. But Steve wasn't done. He walked off the stage. The audience watched him go. He came back 2 minutes later with a piece of paper, and he handed it to Raymond without a word. Raymond looked at it. His chin dropped. He put his hand over his eyes. The paper was a referral, personally arranged, in the 2 minutes Steve had been off stage, to a therapist the show worked with, fully covered, no copay, no 6-session limit, no 31 minutes on hold. And beside it, a note in Steve's handwriting, "For as long as you need." The Williamson family, the competing family, the grandmother with the glitter sign, the grandmother stood up from her seat. She crossed the stage. She had never met Raymond Coates before that day. She put both her arms around him and held him while he finally, after 4 years and 2 months and 11 days, let himself cry. Her granddaughter crossed behind her and stood next to Camille and held her hand. The audience of 300 people was on its feet before any of them decided to stand. Steve was not done. The show announced that evening that it was establishing the Still Here Fund, named for the word in Raymond's notebook, in partnership with the Mental Health America organization, dedicated specifically to providing therapy access for single parents who fall through the coverage gaps. The initial commitment, $2.1 million. 3 months later, the clip of Raymond's 11 words had been viewed 94 million times across platforms. Mental Health America reported a 340% increase in helpline contacts in the 2 weeks following the broadcast. The Still Here Fund had received $6.7 million in public donations, covering therapy for 4,200 families in its first quarter of operation. A year after that day, Raymond stood in front of 600 people at a mental health advocacy event in Atlanta. Camille was beside him. He had slept through the night the previous evening, actually slept, deeply, without waking. He mentioned it in his speech. The room gave him a standing ovation for sleeping. That tells you everything about the people who were in that room, and what that audience had been carrying too. Today, Raymond is the Community Outreach Coordinator for the Still Here Fund. He works with 22 partner warehouses and trade companies across Georgia to identify workers who may be struggling silently. He keeps his green work shirt, but he doesn't need the notebook the same way anymore. He still writes in it, but now sometimes he writes 2 words, "Still Here." And once, on a morning in April, When the light came through the kitchen window in a particular way, and Camille was eating cereal and humming something under her breath, he wrote 3. Still here, safe. The closing image the internet could not stop sharing was not Steve Harvey's face. It was not the cheering audience. It was a single frame from the broadcast, captured by a still photographer in the wings. Camille Coates, 12 years old, standing beside her father on the Family Feud stage, her hand flat against her chest. The same gesture she had made in the kitchen 3 years before, standing next to a man with cold coffee, watching. Except this time her eyes were closed, and she was smiling. Some people carry a weight for so long, they forget there was ever a time before the weight. And sometimes, in a room they almost didn't walk into, someone looks at them, really looks, and the weight lifts. Not because the hard part is over, because they are finally not lifting it alone. If this story stayed with you, hit subscribe and leave a comment below. We'd love to know what word you would write in your notebook today. And share this with someone who needs to know that silence is sometimes the loudest thing in a room.